I was born in a communist country.
Yeah.
And I know this is a lie. You're lying to people. Why you're doing this? And it was a constant debate and discussion.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who said, please, today, no, don't debate with anyone. But I was feeling so bad about what was going on in Venezuela, universities, and then in society and with the media. And then we began to see the same signs. And that's why after 1989, when the Caracazo, which was a huge problem in Venezuela, in Caracas, and other cities, that we decided to leave the country. And my dad told me, we need to leave because communism is coming here. I said, no, I don't think so. I wanted to stay again. I wanted to stay because at least I have my friends.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
All right, well, thanks for being with us for another episode of American Potential, another great immigration story. I love helping tell these stories of people who flee their country to come find freedom in the United States of America. And they're always inspiring, I think, to all of us as Americans. And freedom means having the opportunity, of course, to speak freely about ideas and not having the government tell you what to think, or restricting access to basic necessities. So when someone loses those freedoms, they take on the responsibility to find freedom once again. And today's guest grew up in Cuba under the totalitarian regime of Castro. And her father secretly educated her and her sister about what freedom was, and he wanted them to be able to experience it. So as she grew up, she saw what happened to those that not only fought for freedom, but even those who just made positive comments about freedom. And it wasn't good. When her family had the opportunity to leave Cuba and go to Venezuela, which at that time was under a democratic regime, they took it. While living in Venezuela, she learned even more about what was happening in Cuba, and she learned the fate of some of her own family members who had become political prisoners. Now, as time passed, her father started to see the roots of communism taking hold and knew they needed to leave there as well. So the family decided to leave Venezuela and come to the United States. Before joining Libre, she worked on human rights issues, which had her traveling internationally, and her work has been recognized by Congress and the city of Boston. I want to welcome Janisset Rivero, who is operations specialist and training manager for Libre. Janisset, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's such a we love allowing folks to come on the podcast and talking through these stories about families that really are desperate for freedom. And in your case, in your family's case, saw it in 2 different countries, right? Creep in. So what were some of the things you remember? I guess let's start about your youth and growing up in Cuba. What do you remember?
Well, my family was like a bubble of freedom.
Uh-huh.
Because my dad and my mom created this space for us where we could talk and we could express ourselves. However, when we were going to school or to other places in society, we knew that we couldn't talk the same things, that we have to restrain our words because it was not going to be good for us or for our parents. So when my dad told me we are not free, and from now on, I was 10 years old. From now on, you're going to sit down here every afternoon after school, and you're going to listen to this broadcast that this were a clandestine thing. Mm-hmm. You couldn't have in Cuba a radio,
right,
shortwave radio, receiving information from outside. So it was penalized by the law. So it was a secret. But still he wanted me to listen, just listening, not talking about that to those to listen to those broadcasting that were coming from the U.S., from Europe, the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe. At that moment, there was a fight against communism in Eastern Europe. So that was my I think my first step into this fight for freedom. I could say that freedom is the value that defined my life search, and my journey. And what I remember is intolerance in school, indoctrination, violence on the streets against people that were voicing their discontent. And I remember my family secretly helping others. I remember my dad trying for us, for my sister and I, to have this free space in our home, and my mom as well. They have suffered the beginning of the regime, of the Castro regime, the revolution, and they have suffered the, killing of many friends, even family members. So they have suffered a lot. They didn't want us to be marked by that suffering. They want us to grow up happy.
Right.
And I think they did. They accomplished that goal. But of course, my dad was a very transparent person. He wanted me to know what freedom was. And he said, the only duty I have is for you and your sister to be free one day. And I don't know how, I don't know when, but it's going to happen. Yeah. And that's how we left to Venezuela as political refugees.
Yeah. So many people in the United States grow up and they don't even think about that. Was there in your mind, as you're thinking back on your childhood, was that was a desire of yours, was to get out of Cuba or to get out to be free, or no?
No, I didn't.
That was mostly your dad.
It were my parents. My parents knew that we have to leave because there was no space for us there.
So they remembered life before the revolution.
Of
so
course.
They remembered that, and that's kind of what probably drove them to.
Absolutely. Right. My dad, being a teenager, fight against the beginning of the revolution with other kids. He was persecuted, but as he was a musician, he could escape the persecution. But others couldn't. Some of them were killed, some of them were put in jail for many years, or some of them were exiled. So he knew perfectly. My mom too. My mom comes from a very Catholic family, and they were against the system, but we were trapped in that island. So I didn't want to leave because I have my grandparents, my cousins, my family, my friends.
Sure.
And that was my world. I couldn't realize until my dad began to tell me, and I began to listen to those broadcasting, I couldn't realize how bad it was. But when we went to Venezuela, then I began to learn Cuban history. And I began I met many of the former political prisoners and their stories. And that was the moment I began my activism pro freedom in Cuba.
Yeah. As a child, I think people get their world is their world. So you didn't know anything else, right? You didn't know what it was like to have freedom, even at the time.
Absolutely.
So you didn't know what you were missing. Would you agree?
Of course.
Yeah.
I didn't know what freedom was.
Right.
It was my dad who said, we are not free. And I was very afraid with that. Because I knew I couldn't repeat anything that we talk at home, at school.
Because your parents just told you that. You can't say, would they tell you that? You can't say this at school?
You cannot say that.
Yeah.
Because then you will get persecuted. Your family will get persecuted, even to taken to jail.
Did you ever did you feel like were neighbors watching you, or were there
Absolutely.
others?
Absolutely. I had, I was 14 years old, and at school, they do this process for you to become a young communist. They have an institution for young communists. As I had good grades, they try to, for those kids that are good students, to be part of the movement, of the communist movement. So they do this process, and they went to my neighborhood asking about me. But my parents were musicians, so they were loved by everyone. So we were like not very, well identified by the regime. But my grandma and my aunt have left already to Venezuela because my uncle was a former political prisoner. I didn't know that. So he was put in jail when he was 16 years old.
Wow.
And spent 10 years in prison. So they were in Venezuela and we were writing letters to them. I mean, I grew up with them. They were my family. So apparently a neighbor got into my home and grabbed one of those letters without my mom knowing, seeing that. And then in a big meeting, they said, why you're writing to the enemy and why you're writing letters to people that are in imperialist countries. And I said, what do you mean? No, because we have a letter you wrote to your grandma. She's my grandma.
Yeah.
I can write letters to her.
Right.
I grew up with her.
Yeah.
And they said, no, you can't, because this is an imperialist country. Venezuela was a free country at that moment, and they didn't have diplomatic relations with Venezuela. So it was the enemy. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I won't stop writing letters to my grandma. But I felt very uncomfortable with that and judged by these people that they didn't even know me or know my family. So that's kind of what a young person, a teenager, experience in Cuba if your family is not completely with the government.
Right. So how old were you then? You were 14 at that time, you were telling me, but how old were you when you went to Venezuela?
I was 15.
15.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was 15. And it was, for me, I think when you're 15, everything is like, has a very emotional impact in your life. I think those years in Venezuela for me were crucial years of my life. And when I got to Venezuela, the first thing I could remember was light. So many lights. My aunt at that moment had been in Venezuela for 3 years, and she lived in an apartment in a 21st floor. So I could say that I stayed, when I got to her apartment, I stayed like for 1 hour just looking at the lights. Because the whole city, you could see, not the whole city, but that part of the city was so illuminated. Because in Cuba, we were accustomed to not to have electricity. So we were walking on the streets at night and there was no lights. So for me, light and freedom has a very... they are intertwined in an emotional way.
Yeah.
For me, freedom is light.
Yeah. Wow. When you went to Venezuela because they had a program there for political prisoners from Cuba
And their families,
right?
for former political prisoners and their families.
Yeah. What was the program? It allowed they just resettled them in Venezuela?
Yes, because the majority of the first group, thousands of political prisoners that were out of prison, they accomplished their sentences of 10, 15, 20 years. They couldn't find a place in the society because it was a communist society and they were against communism. So the Venezuelan government opened at that moment this program for Cuban former political prisoners and their families to go there. And through my uncle, it was like an open visa. He could take whoever in the family he could take. But at that moment, unfortunately, my uncle has died. He had an accident 4 years after he was released from prison. But my aunt, his widow, and my cousin were part of the program. They left before us. Then my grandma after them, and then us, the four of us, my parents and my sister and I.
Yeah. Did you know at the time that your uncle had been a political prisoner?
No. They didn't tell me that.
Do you know?
I
Do you
didn't
know what
that.
he was? What he was charged with? What the crime was?
At the beginning of the revolution, they sentenced people for without any proofs or anything.
Sure.
He was charged with conspiracy against the state. He was 16 years old.
Wow.
They couldn't find any proof that he was conspiring. Of course, he was against the system, as many of young Cubans that were not communist, and communism was imposed in the society, and they fight for that in different ways. Of course, he was part of an organization against the communist regime, but they couldn't prove anything to him that he was conspiring or whatever. He has to spend 10 years in prison in terrible conditions, terrible conditions, living in his underwears, having no food. Sometimes they will beat him and the others. There were others that were killed because they didn't want to work, like forced labor in the camps of near to the prisons. So it's a terrible story. My parents suffered with him this process, and they didn't want us to know that. I don't know if that was good or bad, but the thing is that I learned all of that in Venezuela.
Yeah. What do you think it is that, and I talk to a lot of folks who talk about someone in their family, whether it was your dad, or your uncle, others, who do choose to fight a regime, and I know how you call it a regime, that do choose to fight a regime. Many people don't choose to fight it. They choose to just submit to it. But what makes the difference between someone who resists that and fights it in your mind? I
think fear is an element that these regimes established from the beginning. So there were thousands of political prisoners in Cuba. In a moment, there were more than 20,000 political prisoners in Cuba at the end of the 60s. So there were a lot of people fighting. Others were killed, and were executed in front of firing squads. They had the idea of recover the republic, recover the free country they used to have. But the majority of the population saw that, saw those executions, because they were put in television. The trials were broadcast in television. So people got afraid, and I don't, blame them, because it was very hard.
Yeah.
So my dad, at the beginning of his of the years of the revolution, tried to fight, but there was a moment that he couldn't do anything else because the majority of the people were in jail. So he did it. He decided to have a family and try to survive. He was in a survival mode. He didn't give up his ideas. He didn't was part of the regime or the organizations of the regime. He was a musician, but he always thought and dreamed about freedom.
Yeah,
that was what his idea of being happy,
right,
to be free, and that's what we learned from him. That love for freedom. And when we got here to the U.S., he was so happy. He was saying, "I'm free, we're free," at the airport. And I thought, oh, my dad is crazy. He is completely insane. But he had that emotional and intellectual link to freedom.
Yeah.
And I think that marked my life in a way that even today I'm doing this. Yeah. So I think my complete life has been fighting for freedom. Anywhere I go, even in Venezuela, it began my activism. So yeah.
Yeah. As you're describing the difference between someone who just sort of goes along and those who might resist a regime like that, it reminds me of our own founding, the founding of our own country, where some people just said, no, we're not going to live under this. We're not going to be taxed by the king and all the grievances that were in the Declaration of Independence. It's just interesting that is a fight. No matter what country you're from, there is a yearning inside of people's heart for freedom.
I think we are born with that seed, that love for freedom. We like an intuition. I was born in a totalitarian country. I was born without freedom.
Yeah,
the freedom was in my heart, and I think freedom is in the heart of every human being. And intuitively, we look for freedom. Right now in Cuba, there are thousands of Cubans that are dreaming about freedom. And they are not only dreaming, they are fighting for freedom. And sometimes you can see them on the streets protesting. They have been repressed. They are repressed right now, but they continue fighting for freedom, voicing their discontent. And what happened with a person, when a person decides to do that, I think enough is enough. I don't take this anymore, and I'm going to be myself. Because these regimes, totalitarian regimes, which are different from authoritarian regimes, they don't want only for you to submit to them. They want to destroy your soul. They want to control your life in a way that you're a known person. And I think that's what people feel. They feel that they have to resist that they are their own person. And they are basically, even before they are involved in a movement, they are basically defending their own life, right, their own soul, not to be seized by these terrible regimes that they want to destroy you. They have you in jail, but you're in jail, and they want to destroy your mind and your soul. That's the terrible reality of those people living in China, in North Korea, in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, in other places, Vietnam, where, different kinds of totalitarianism, but the same basic modus operandi.
Right. Yeah. So you were in Venezuela, and talk about what it was like at first in Venezuela, and then we'll talk about how sadly Venezuela was slipping away as well.
I could say Venezuela was my school of freedom, or my freedom first experience. Freedom of speech in Venezuela was amazing at that moment. And I was completely impacted by seeing, people on TV talking horrible things about the president. And are they going to be in jail now? No. So that was my first surprise. Then I went to school. It was difficult for me to get to school in Venezuela. It was a process, but I finally got to a high school. And in the high school, I learned history and geography of Venezuela and civics. I learned English, grammar. I used to study Russian in Cuba. So it was an experience of, for example, doing research papers. I haven't done that in my life. I mean, in Cuba, all the information is controlled. So in Venezuela, I could go to the library and read the books I wanted and look for the information I wanted and make my own opinion and decision on what to believe or what to put in the paper. That was great. But then when I went to university in Venezuela, then I began to realize that communist ideas were there, and they were promoting them to the students, to Venezuelan students. So that was the moment I said, no, I'm going to fight back. And I would go, and I was almost a Venezuelan because my accent was not Cuban, was Venezuelan already. So they didn't know I was Cuban. So I will go there and say, why you're promoting this, literature? This is lies. I mean, you're lying to these students. Why we're lying? This is our opinion, whatever. No, this is not your opinion. This is a doctrine. You're trying to destroy this country with this. Well, that's your opinion and that's mine. Yes, but I'm Cuban. I was born in a communist country.
Yeah.
And I know this is a lie. You're lying to people. Why you're doing this? And it was a constant debate and discussion.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who said, please, today, no, don't debate with anyone. But I was feeling so bad about what was going on in Venezuelan universities, and then in society and with the media. And then we began to see the same signs. And that's why after 1989, when the Caracazo, which was a huge problem in Venezuela, in Caracas, and other cities, that we decided to leave the country. Yeah. And my dad told me, we need to leave because communism is coming here. And I said, no, I don't think so. I wanted to stay again. I wanted to stay because at least I have my friends, my new friends, my Venezuelan friends. So I didn't want to go again, to begin again in a new country. But he was right. Communism was coming, and it did. And I warned my Venezuelan friends, look at this, look at that, but they didn't believe me or believe us, because all the Cubans, we were doing that in Venezuela, the exile community. We were trying for Venezuelans to understand what we were telling them and the dangers of socialism. They didn't listen. They elected Hugo Chavez, and the rest is history. Yeah. I mean, the country is still under a socialist regime.
Yeah. So you came, and your dad saw that coming, and he said, we have to leave Venezuela. And so how did you get to the United States?
Well, at that moment, there was a program. It was like, it's Providence, right?
Sure.
There was this program that Cubans in third countries, Cubans not in Cuba or in the U.S., but in other countries, could come to the U.S. with a humanitarian parole and become residents. So my dad learned that. We went there, we present all our documentation, and we came to the U.S. Through that program.
Yeah. I'd love asking, this is like my favorite question to ask someone who immigrates to the United States. What was something that surprised you when you came to America? What was the thing that kind of jumped out at you?
Well, we arrived in Miami. Miami was very hot and humid. So I said, I don't like this place.
Let's go. You didn't say let's go back.
Yes, I say. My dad told me, wait a second. You need to first experience here. If you're not comfortable here, then you have the right to leave. That was whatever he was. Yeah. He said at that moment.
He believed in freedom.
Yes, he did.
You could even go back if you wanted.
Yes, he told me that. Yeah. He even told me that when we arrived in Venezuela. He told me, if you don't like it here, you can go back to Cuba. Yeah. But I know now that was impossible.
Sure. Yeah.
So, well, the most important thing I learned when I got here the first years was that I could do whatever I want, that I could go wherever I want, that I could buy a car, go to school, go to university, have a job, have a bank account, and I could live a better life, even the life we had in Venezuela, a better life, because here you could, advance, you could prosper in this country. And immediately I got here in July, and in August I was already in a college in Miami learning English, because the English I knew was grammar. It was not conversational, and I studied communications in Venezuela. So how could I be a journalist or a person in communications if I don't know the language? That is not possible.
Right.
So I said, no, English first. And then from there, I continued my education. I didn't do communications again. I did Spanish, modern languages, and then I have a master's degree in literature, and I am a writer.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I interviewed somebody the other day who talked about when they left Cuba, that the government came in and inventoried everything that they had.
That's true.
Because it all belonged to the state.
Absolutely.
And you had to give everything back.
Everything. Our house was closed once we left, and everything that was inside.
So you didn't own the house. Did the government own the house?
The government owned everything.
Yeah.
The government in Cuba owns everything.
Right.
That idea that there are private property in Cuba is a lie.
Yeah, right.
So yes, what we were doing, we were renting from the government. Basically,
so
we didn't
paid
have
them rent?
Yes. We didn't have a house. And we were not allowed to have a property because in Cuba there is no private property at all.
Did you have a car?
We didn't have a car. We were walking.
You walked everywhere.
Few Cubans had a car at that moment.
And if they had a car, was that a car owned by the government and given to them?
If you had a car before the revolution, you can keep that car for a while, but then you don't have anything to fix the car, or so people, get rid of their cars. The majority. Others have the opportunity to fix them. If you had a house, then even though the government will, if you leave the country, the government will intervene the house. It's not your house. So when we left, they intervened. That's the word they use, the house, and everything that was inside. And I remember I left some things, some personal things in the house because I forgot. I couldn't go back and take my things because it was already, sealed.
Yeah.
They will seal the door of the house. So you don't have anything. But let me tell you something. We got to Venezuela with our clothes and anything else. And we survived. My dad had a business, a small business in Venezuela. And he also works as a musician with my mom. So he paid for my private university. And then we came here, and we have to sell everything we had there to come here with some money. But still, we got here with nothing. And here we are. Yeah. So the most important thing you have is yourself and your mind and your soul. Material things will come and go. They are not important.
Yeah. Yeah, they were even in this interview we were talking, and they even said, they inventoried every pair of pants that they had, every shirt, everything. To them and kept it.
And kept it.
The government kept it.
Yes. And they will, I don't know what they do with that.
Yeah.
I don't know if they will give it to their followers, or I don't know what they do with that.
And you may be too young to know this, but I'll ask it anyway. It seems, in every regime like that, there's the people, and then there's those that are in charge, and they seem to do a lot better, don't they? The people who are running the government.
Absolutely.
Always seem to somehow have more pairs of pants and a nicer house than everyone.
Absolutely. There is a class created by them. It's a revolutionary class. The people that are aligned with the party, and even the people that are in governmental positions, those live better, and the majority of the population live in miserable conditions, and you don't have the opportunity to break that misery or that poverty, because there is no way a person that doesn't have freedom could prosper.
Sure.
So the only way you get to prosperity is through freedom. Is the only way. In Cuba, you cannot, because government controls everything. Your education, your jobs, your house, even your entertainment, everything. They control culture, they control society, they control political power and economic power. All of that is in their hands. And this is a family, the Castro family, who has been there for 65 years. It's terrible.
Yeah. What's the first, do you remember the first time you went in a grocery store in the United States?
Absolutely, I remember. Yes.
That's the one thing every immigrant seems to remember.
Overwhelming.
It is, yeah.
I told my dad, please, I don't want to be here. Take me out. I don't, this is too much for me.
Too many choices.
Too many colors, too many things, too many products, too many terrible. Even in Venezuela, they have the small supermarkets, and that was impressive for me. But here, this, Publix or I don't know, these huge supermarkets were overwhelming for me. It took a while for me to get to a supermarket and understand all the products and all the things, and not getting confused with that or overwhelmed. But at that moment, I said, no, I'm leaving here. Take me out. I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
I said, why were you like that? No, this is too much for me.
Your dad was like, this is freedom, right?
Yes.
He was trying to explain. Talk about some of the work you did on human rights issues.
Well, since I got to the U.S., I was part of the foundation of an organization of Cuban Americans, to fight for freedom in Cuba in a helping people inside the island through nonviolent means to understand what a totalitarian regime is and how to fight for freedom. And during that time, I write a lot articles that were published in Puerto Rico, the U.S., Spain. In Venezuela, I was writing too in newspapers as a teenager. I had some opportunities there. And then I had radio programs broadcasting to Cuba through shortwave. Mm-hmm. Imagine that. I was remembering
you remembered
myself.
What it did for you, huh? Yeah.
Yes. So, and also I travel a lot internationally at the UN, OAS, different countries, talking about what is a communist country, giving my testimony, and also trying to get solidarity for the people that were in Cuba fighting for freedom. And I did that for many, many years. I'm still doing it. Mm-hmm. I'm still some kind of in my heart is this fight will always be a priority. However, and I also work in a marketing agency and other things. I did many things when I got here. But for many years, I was part of this organization, first as a volunteer, then working there. But there was a moment that I was tired, exhausted, because it was a 24/7 job. It was not a job, it's a cause. Mm-hmm. So I said, no, I need to quit. I need to have some time to recover, because imagine I was transcribing these testimonies of people that their children were killed, that they were tortured. So it's hard.
Emotional work, yeah.
Yes, and I that year, every year doing that and documenting and writing reports and going to the UN and trying to talk, and the Cuban government trying to attack me. And they in fact attacked me many times physically and verbally to prevent me for giving my testimony. Mm-hmm. And I brought people that were victims, direct victims of communism in Cuba, to the UN, to the council. Many stories I have. But then one day I said, no, I need to rest. And then I found Libre. I found the Libre Initiative. Mm-hmm. And I was already concerned about the situation here in the US. I was also seeing the signs. And I said, no, I have to do something for my daughter, for my nephews. And then I met Libre, and I began to work with Libre at the end of 2015 until now. Now I'm working with the institute, with the Libre Institute. In this time, I have published 3 books, 2 poetry books, and 1 novel last year.
Yeah, that comes from your musician parents, maybe. So, right, the arts.
Yes, I have a family of artists, musicians, painters,
right,
and also writers. And I used to sing a lot. I used to sing a lot, but now I don't. I have a problem with my vocal cords. I play piano, and my first education was in a musical school. So in a music school. So but writing for me is the way I can reflect upon all the things that happen in my life and all those stories that I have learned from other people. And those stories you cannot put in a report to the UN or in a press release.
Right.
Those stories are more profound. So literature for me is that channel where I can put that. So when we die and when my generation is over, my daughter's generation and the future generations could read that as a testimony, testifying how important freedom is.
Yeah.
So that's why.
What's something, this be kind of the last question, what's something that you want Americans to understand about communism and about the importance of freedom?
I would like Americans to understand that government is not the solution for problems in a society. Every society has problems. When you have rule of law and when you have rights, you need to keep them. The government is administrating in a way some of the details of the society, but government cannot be the one that controls your health, your education, your jobs. That's up to you and your society. So limited government is better because with limited government we have free people, free citizens. Yeah. When we begin to depend on government, then government will do whatever it wants with us and with our children. So freedom has to be a choice first for every human being because we are free creatures. We were created by God as free people. And that's something that you need to understand. And then that freedom you need to practice with your family, your community, your state, your nation. And this nation was founded on those principles, that every man has been created by God and has at least 3 important rights, right? The right to life, right to freedom, the right to do whatever you want with your life, to develop your talents in the way you want, and to have a purpose in life. So that is in the Declaration of Independence, is in the Constitution. So we are privileged to be in this country. Every day of my life, I thank God for this opportunity to be here. But I'm not going to be here without saying anything about what happened to us, because this society could change anytime if we don't take care of those freedoms and we keep the government limited.
Janisset, thank you. Thanks for joining us and telling your story.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Janisset is a prophet in talking about some of these things and speaking to the American people. Again, we so often forget how special of a place in which we live, a place where individuals have the rights, God-given rights. Our founding fathers declared God-given rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and so much more. And it's people like Janisset who help us understand the value of that and why it's so important and why it's so special and why we have to fight for it every day. Thanks for joining us on American Potential.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.